chrysalis for 4 years, about 1980 through 1984. And then we had health issues with parents, big health issues. I was gone a lot, and Joan was working very hard, and we had those same issues. People still visiting, and that was interesting. But it was just tense, and it began to fold. And eventually, Joan and I got divorced, and that kind of messed everything up. We had actually signed the land over to the community if they wanted to support it financially. Well, we're talking about people living in the woods off the grid. They don't have a lot of jingle, so they weren't really ready to step up and pay real cash. So it just kind of folded, and some of our land family lived there for a little while longer. And it just, it kind of like slowly went out, sort of like a sick ladybug, or a lightning bug. Lightning bug. Its light finally just got dimmer and dimmer. Okay, now what are we going to do after chrysalis? I went to Twin Oaks to live at Twin Oaks after my divorce from Joan. And that was a lifesaver. I lost my father, lost my mom, got divorced. I got slammed several different ways. I think 3 strikes and you're out, but I was out of the area anyway. And went to Twin Oaks, and I loved it. I loved that place. I've been there several times already. Kind of knew the whole regime there, and they have wonderful leadership. And I certainly recommend this. They have planners. There are 3 planners that are usually the elders, very highly skilled people, and a 4th planner that's waiting as to take their position the following year. So every year, one person goes off the board or the leadership group, and one person comes on. So you have an exchange of points of view, and then the people that were originally on, or in most cases, are not back on the board again. And they look at the general policy, make some of the tough decisions that might be made, particularly economic. And the planners is one of the best leadership types of things I can ever imagine. Another thing Twin Oaks would do is that get you away from isolation, because you see people at the meals, the group meals. In fact, Rickety Bill actually cooked. It wasn't just a wiener roast either. I had went into the kitchen about 3 hours before the meal that's going to be served by Rickety Bill. Lunch, for example, for 80 people. And I'd have a soup and a salad and a dessert and an entree. And I had enough variety that I probably got most people interested in the food I was making. At least one of the dishes might work for them. And so I try to cover my lack of professionalism with quantity in that case. On once a week, I cook for dinners, and I had an assistant cook, and then some visitors would help chop vegetables and stuff, and I made sure my lunches were close to where when I cooked dinner, so I could go back and forth with leftovers for soup. And I had a very modern kitchen. It was mostly vegetarian type of emphasis, but I would cook meat, and that was appreciated. Actually, the equipment was first class. The building was first class. It would not look like a downtrodden rural building to you. It would look like some clubhouse at some gated community in the woods, maybe in Colorado or in the high country of a bunch of pine trees. But it's a beautiful building. Actually, I helped build it a little bit. And it was large. And the interesting thing in the kitchen, of course, we had a sanitary dishwashing system since we had so many people. And it was just modern, with great big equipment and stuff like that. We had a big walk-in freezer, and I could cook close to 100 pieces of chicken at one time. So Rickety Bill went through a lot of chicken, and took out quite a bit of the country's population. Some of the meals he fixed. Some of the other jobs I had, I was assistant visitor manager. You say, well, jobs? What do you mean by jobs? Everybody would take a labor sheet, a paper, and make out how many hours they wanted in different categories, and then the labor group would try to make sure everything was fair and that you got about 45 hours total. I had 20 hours of assistant visitor manager. I'm sorry, about 9 hours of that. About 20 hours of being the manager of the Holstein Dairy. They're milking about 9 cows, about 80 gallons of milk a day. We say, how in the world did you get that much milk? Well, Bill had secrets. It came from the goat industry, but we didn't tell him that part. And actually, I was involved, and it was pretty controversial, in a modernization of the dairy. A friend of mine, McCune, and I had the authority to go out and research all the dairies in the area, and then come up with a design and a cost to milk 4 cows at a time up on a platform, so you didn't have to bend over all the time. And the labor, time-wise, should be cut by about 70%. And there's another reason, and this is very important, and anybody that didn't agree with that should listen up. Frankly, that dairy could have handled about 80, 90 milk cows. Could have been another business. Do we have a room for cheese that could have been cleaned easily? Yes. Yogurt, ice cream. Do we have a feed room that was totally separate? The dairy, was it built to be grade A? Yes. So we could have bottled grade A milk or whatever. It just gave us another industry, and very few people realize that was one of the reasons for this. Well, after I left there, and after a year and a half, it became controversial that we have this weird dairy barn, and the cows go up in the air on a concrete slab, and it looks so unnatural that there must be something wrong with this. It's too modern. So milking 1 cow at a time and taking 3 hours to do the chores when you only needed to take about 45 minutes to an hour was a contest. And there's a couple of books that it was written that dairy might have been a mistake. The fact of the matter is the dairy finally got used to it. I don't know exactly how they got the cows trained and everything like that, but that was a very interesting story. And it became a little more commercial, at least possibly. But frankly, we hit a high point when I was there of breeding the animals and getting the calves and getting a good quantity of milk. And I was in charge of all the veterinary for the entire community, also in charge of the safety. One of the values of cooperative communities is safety. You can know who needs a wheelchair. You can know who needs some care. You can understand somebody that doesn't see well or has an ailment of some sort, and emphasize safety. So we would have fire extinguishers everywhere and strips of sandy tape on our staircases, flashlights available everywhere. And right away there was a health team as well, so anybody that got sick could be nurtured by volunteer nurses, volunteer male nurses as well. I mean, it's an egalitarian community, so the jobs would shift back and forth without any thought. And actually, there was a doctor that came through the community and stayed for years. So they were helpful. And then we were connected with Patch Adams. And Patch Adams had his own commune up in West Virginia. It's called Gesundheit. It's a good name for it. And Patch Adams, he was kind of made famous by Robin Williams when they did the movie Patch Adams. And he was a total character, just like in the movie. And all of his associates were just about the same. And so I just had a wonderful time talking to these people. There was one lady with them. She was a psychologist. And she and I together, because I had an interest in this, would have a group class on mental health every week. And then she and I would lay in the hammock and giggle for a couple hours every day. So I had a great time associating with Patch Adams and his jolly bunch of physicians that were half clown and half physician, very much in an altered state. It's great. Twin Oaks really had a lot of transparency. You knew who was in charge of different areas that was just based on their skill set. And they always had an apprentice working with them, egalitarian-wise. A lot of women took male types of traditional jobs, carpentry and auto repair, and the men did a lot of child care. Child care was a little different. B.F. Skinner had written the book Walden too, and basically Twin Oaks is modeled after that. But they also talked about kind of group child care, and that didn't work at Twin Oaks. The parents were often involved by choice. So you had two people that might be looking after a young like a 5-year-old. And there weren't that many children, probably a dozen to 15, that range. You don't want too many dependents. About 20% is a max in terms of my research on communities. And each of the children would have their parents, and then we have another person, what they call a meta, which comes from the Israeli kibbutz, which is kind of Twin Oaks is similar to that. 3% of the Israelis live in cooperative kibbutz, where the industry and everything else is collective. And that's more of a model. About 1/3 of the people in Twin Oaks had a Jewish background. So it's, you can see that the kibbutz had quite an influence on us. Anyway, back to the kids. They would have 3 people looking after them. And let's say one of the parents was burnt out on the kids for one reason or another. You just never know. And they would have 2 other members of the community and the one parent look after the kids. So I always had 3. And if you were to approach this group of 1 or 2 or 3 that were working with the kids, usually one-on-one, you did not interrupt. In fact, you pretty much left them alone unless there was an emergency. And that's, again, an indication of privacy. Even conversations between adults, you came and stood for maybe a minute to see if you would be recognized to join the conversation. The value of communities, in part, is the trial of social norms and social ideas. And you can try all sorts of things and see what works best. I think the term modeling is something that we might bring up, and that was at Twin Oaks. There were several people there, probably 8 or 9, that modeled very, very industrious behavior. So when they were knocking out the planks of wood or cutting the firewood or tending the garden, they were always busy. That was like, and they seemed to be having fun. That's the main thing. If they seem to be having fun, then you want to join it. And so, and Twin Oaks also made commercial hammocks, and they had music in the where they built all the hammocks in the indoors, and they found out through B.F. Skinner with his having the environment changed in order to improve productivity. I mean, Robert Owen in New Harmony, Indiana, the ancient, not ancient, but long time ago, intentional community that's now a monument down in New Harmony, Indiana. He tried this same technique of he had what's called a silent monitor, 4 colors, and the people would spin it. So when they finished their chores, through some of their production, they turned the monitor. And eventually, everybody was kind of competing monitor against monitor. In other words, you changed the environment in order to increase the productivity. You didn't blame the people. And so one thing they changed is that everybody had independent music. So you didn't have to listen to classical all day or rap or I don't even know if rap existed at that time. This is back in a long time ago. But anyway, so Twin Oaks was very experimental and in many ways one of the best years of my life. After Twin Oaks, I ended up going to Stell in Northern Illinois for a little while, about 6 months, because I was the main designer of a greenhouse that was going to be well over several acres in size. I got the land to be donated, and then we started looking for $7 million locally, and every bank chipped in to the point where they only had $3 million. They never saw that much cash before, so it didn't go too well financially. We had a board up in Chicago, and they didn't like the fact that in rural Illinois that they couldn't come up with the money. They probably had that in their savings account, some of those guys on their board. But eventually that folded. But during the time that we had this greenhouse, and I stayed at Stell, Stell had been an intentional community at one time, and they built a much more modern, suburban-looking community. And I've actually written an article for Branches magazine in Indianapolis on the efficient and more luxury aspect of a common subdivision. Curvilinear streets, lots and lots of green space, no fences. Everybody was free to walk through anywhere you wanted to. That's back to the communal aspect. We had a common swimming pool and hot tub. How many places have that? And then 8.5 acres of garden and orchard. The orchard was 120 fruit trees. So this is big stuff. And on the houses, sometimes they were duplexes, one behind the other. You couldn't really tell it was a duplex. And it was efficient in terms of affordable housing. And then every house was solar oriented in terms of passive solar, with big windows on the south side, or maybe even a box of glass on the second floor that would trap heat that they could use. So Stell was very enlightened, and I enjoyed that a great deal, but the greenhouse thing flopped. One thing I want to mention about the greenhouse I was proud of, we couldn't have a roof on there that we could afford. Couldn't afford a steel roof or a glass roof or anything like that. So I looked at balloons, and I looked at tarps and sailcloth, and eventually I designed a roof of something like sailcloth, and it went downward like a funnel and made a sky funnel for water. It would be about a 5-foot opening in diameter at the bottom of this. It would be heated during the winter, so it would thaw the snow and it would go to the middle. And then that funnel would go all the way down through the project and into an internal reservoir to irrigate the crops year round. So it's called a sky funnel design for a 3-acre size greenhouse, which is incredibly large. And we would be most likely shipping restaurant tomatoes to St. Louis and Chicago.